The church smelled faintly of lilies, that cloying sweetness that always reminded me of endings. I sat in the front pew, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap that my knuckles looked pale against the black fabric of my dress. The priest's words blurred together, kind phrases about Daniel's steady character, his devotion to family, his quiet generosity. I heard them, but they seemed to echo through water. Friends and neighbors moved past in a slow procession, each one leaning in to murmur condolences. He was such a good man, Maribel. We'll miss his laugh. I nodded, smiled when I could, but mostly I stared at the polished wood of the casket and felt the emptiness spreading through me like frost. I glanced across the aisle and caught my son's profile. Evan stood near the back with his wife talking in a low voice to my sister-in-law. I didn't need to strain to hear the words. They drifted forward with cruel clarity. "This house is too big for Mom now," he said. His hand sliced the air as if already measuring what could be sold. "She won't be able to manage it alone." My throat tightened. Even in the shadow of his father's casket, my son was thinking about walls and square footage. When the service ended, the crowd thinned. Neighbors returned to their cars. Relatives folded themselves into rented vans, and the hush that followed seemed heavier than the ceremony itself. Alone in the parlor, I gathered the flowers people had left behind and pressed a few stems together in my hands. At home that evening, I found the envelope. It was tucked inside Daniel's desk drawer, his familiar handwriting spelling my name across the front. I sat at the kitchen table, the house far too quiet without his steps on the stairs, and opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were three things: a notarized deed to a modest lake house on the Michigan shore, the crisp statement of a trust account totaling $1.8 million, and a single page in Daniel's steady script. "Maribel, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I wanted to make sure you were safe. The house by the water is yours, and so are the funds. Use them as you see fit. Don't let anyone take them from you." I pressed the page to my chest. Tears slid hot down my face, not only from grief, but from the clarity of his foresight. He had seen something I had not wanted to name, that Evan's hunger for more would only sharpen after loss. I slid the documents back into the envelope and locked it in the small metal box under my bed. I would not tell Evan, not yet. Not when the echo of his words at the funeral still stung my ears. The night grew still around me. Upstairs, the floorboards creaked with their familiar complaints, and I imagined Daniel's voice telling me to stay strong. I smoothed the envelope flat and set it carefully aside, already knowing that the real test would come sooner than I wished. The next morning, I woke to the sound of boxes thudding onto my porch. A week after the funeral, I was still moving through the days as though wrapped in cotton. Meals had no taste. Nights stretched long and sleepless. I thought perhaps grief would soften my son's sharp edges, but when the knock came at mid-morning, it was not sympathy standing on my porch. It was Evan lugging a cardboard box in each arm. He dropped them by the door with a grunt, then waved toward his car where more boxes were stacked in the back seat. His expression was brisk, businesslike. "Pack your things, Mom," he said, pulling a glossy card from his pocket. "The house is already sold." The card bore the logo of a realtor. I didn't know her smiling face printed above bold letters that read, "Top properties, fast results." I held the card as if it might burn my skin. My voice came out softer than I intended. "Already sold." Evan nodded, his mouth tightening. "It's too much house for you. Taxes, maintenance, all those stairs, you can't handle it. This is for your own good. You'll be better off in a condo. Smaller, safer." His words, meant to sound caring, were clipped and impatient. My fingers trembled around the realtor's card, but I forced a small smile, the kind that used to soothe him when he was a boy on the verge of a tantrum. "I'll need some time," I murmured, "to go through things, to gather memories, your father's books, the photo albums." I can't just toss them into boxes in one day. He sighed as if indulging a stubborn child. Fine, but don't drag your feet. The market's good. Buyers are waiting. When he turned to haul in another box, I slipped the realtor's card onto the hallway table and quietly snapped a picture of it with my phone. Then I angled the camera toward the boxes stacked on the porch and took another shot. Evidence. Proof. Something told me I would need it. Evan came back in arms loaded and thudded the boxes onto the floor. Dust rose in the beam of morning light slanting through the window. He wiped his forehead, then glanced at me with an odd mix of annoyance and authority. You'll thank me later, Mom. I'm just trying to make this easier. I nodded again, but inside my chest ached with a mixture of betrayal and cold resolve. Daniel's envelope was still hidden in the metal box under my bed. The deed to trust my shield if I used it wisely. After Evan left, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the realtor's card until the edges blurred. Then I picked up the phone and dialed the number I'd found scribbled in Daniel's address book, Mara Feld, attorney at law. I remembered her faintly from gatherings years ago, a sharp-eyed woman with a steady handshake. When her assistant answered, I explained that I needed to review my late husband's estate documents. My voice shook, but I steadied it enough to make the appointment for the following morning. Hanging up, I pressed my palm flat on the cool wood of the table. I had spent a lifetime smoothing quarrels, avoiding storms, believing family meant safety. Now my own son was moving me out of my house as if I were a tenant whose lease had expired. That night, I placed the photos I'd taken into a private folder on my phone and locked it with a code Evan didn't know. The house was still mine for now, but the sound of boxes scraping against the floor echoed long after he left, as if the walls themselves already sensed eviction. I slept little, waiting for dawn, the appointment with Mara, circling in my mind like a lifeline. The next morning, I dressed carefully as though my clothing might shield me. A plain gray skirt, the black cardigan Daniel always said, made me look steady. My hands shook slightly as I buttoned it, but by the time I reached the law office, I had arranged my face into something calm. The building was modest, a 2-story brick square on the edge of downtown. Inside, polished wood floors creaked under my shoes. I gave my name to the receptionist, who offered a kind smile and ushered me into a corner office lined with shelves of books whose spines gleamed with years of use. Mara Feld rose from behind her desk. She was taller than I remembered, with streaks of silver in her dark hair and a presence that filled the room before she spoke. She clasped my hand firmly. Maribel, I'm so sorry for your loss. Daniel often spoke of you when he was here. Hearing his name spoken in that office made my throat tighten. I sat across from her, clutching my purse in my lap, and slid the sealed envelope across the desk. I found this after the funeral, I said. He never told me about any of it. Mara adjusted her glasses, pulled out the documents, and read through them with a careful eye. The silence stretched, broken only by the faint ticking of a clock on the wall. Finally, she looked up. Daniel was deliberate, she said. This was careful planning. He created a revocable living trust years ago. You are the sole trustee and beneficiary. That means you control all assets inside it. No one else has any claim. I exhaled slowly, a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. So Evan can't sell the house. Not without your signature, she replied. And the lake house she tapped the Ladybird deed with her pen is automatically yours upon Daniel's death. That deed transfers outside of probate. It cannot be contested in the way a will sometimes can. I closed my eyes briefly, relief rushing through me like warm water. Daniel had thought of everything. But Mara's tone sharpened. The only way Evan could interfere is through a guardianship or conservatorship petition. He could argue that you're no longer capable of managing your own affairs. If a judge believed him, he could be granted control. The words landed like a gavel on my chest. He's already been saying the house is too much for me. That I can't manage. Mara nodded gravely. It fits. He may try to paint you as incompetent. That's the opening. I gripped the arms of the chair. I had a cognitive exam last week. My doctor said I'm fine. Good. Keep that record safe. Make copies. Judges want documentation, not just testimony. And remember, appearing organized matters as much as truth. Her words carried the calm certainty of someone who had fought this battle before. Still, I felt my stomach twist. My own son preparing to stand in a courtroom and strip me of my voice, it was almost unthinkable. Mara slid the papers back toward me. Daniel trusted you. He left very little wiggle room for anyone else. But Evan may try to test that. The trust indeed will hold in court. Your task is to protect yourself in the meantime. I tucked the envelope back into my purse, holding it as though it were fragile glass. On the walk back to my car, the October air bit at my face, sharp and bracing. I thought of Evan's voice at the funeral, the certainty with which he'd spoken about selling my home. Now I saw the path ahead. Clearly, he would not stop with boxes and realtors. He would come with papers, with signatures, with claims that his mother was no longer of sound mind. At home, I placed the documents inside the safe beneath my bed and pressed my palm against the cool metal lid. Daniel had left me more than property. He had left me a blueprint for defense, a way to keep standing when my own son pushed against me. The phone rang that evening, and when I picked it up, Evan's voice came through, impatient, already commanding. Mom, have you started packing yet? I looked at the safe hidden just a few feet away and knew the real battle was only beginning. 2 days later, Evan showed up unannounced. I was in the kitchen rinsing dishes when the doorbell rang sharp and insistent. He didn't wait for me to answer. He let himself in, carrying a thick manila folder under his arm. Mom, we need to take care of some paperwork, he said, dropping the folder onto the kitchen table as though it were already settled. I dried my hands slowly, deliberately, and took a seat. What kind of paperwork? He slid the documents out, tapping the top page with his finger. Power of attorney. Just a formality. It'll make things easier for me to help you. Bank's utilities insurance, you won't have to worry about all the details. I stared at the lines of text swimming across the page. The words, durable power of attorney, sat at the top in bold letters. My heart thudded, but I forced my voice to sound curious rather than alarmed. Easier for you or easier for me? I asked. He gave a quick laugh, the kind he used to mask irritation. Both. Come on, Mom. I'm trying to take care of you. I picked up the first sheet, adjusted my glasses, and let my eyes drift slowly across the lines. I didn't read. I already knew what it meant. Sign this, and everything Daniel left to me would fall into Evan's hands. I nodded absently, tapping the pen against the margin. It's a lot of words, I murmured. I'll need time to look it over properly. Evan exhaled loudly, pushing back from the table. It's standard. Everyone does this when they get older. Don't make it harder than it needs to be. I smiled faintly, the same smile I had practiced at the funeral. All the more reason I should understand what I'm signing. Your father used to say, never put your name on a line until you know what's behind it. His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He gathered the papers, slipped them back into the folder, and stood. Fine. I'll leave them here. Read them tonight. I'll come back tomorrow for your signature. When the door shut behind him, I sagged against the chair. My hand pressed flat against the table to steady myself. Tomorrow. He expected obedience tomorrow. That evening, after the sun dipped and the house settled into its creaks, I climbed the narrow step stool in the study and mounted a small camera high on the wall above my desk. Daniel had bought it years ago for security, though we'd never used it. Now it pointed directly at the spot where Evan always placed his folders. Quiet proof should I ever need it. I tested the angle with my phone, saw the grainy image of the desktop appear, and felt a sliver of strength return. At least now I wasn't entirely unarmed. The following morning, I carried the newspaper out to the porch. The air smelled of damp leaves, and the street was unusually still. I bent to pick up the paper, and when I straightened, I noticed Mrs. Kerrigan across the way. She was standing at her mailbox, though she'd already retrieved her letters. She wasn't reading them. She was watching me. Her head tilted slightly, eyes narrowed, as if she were studying more than greeting. I raised a hand politely. "Good morning." She startled, fumbling with her envelope, then forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Morning, Maribel. Chilly one, isn't it?" "Yes," I said, holding her gaze a moment longer before retreating inside. At the kitchen window, I peeked through the curtain. She lingered another minute, not moving, then finally turned back toward her door. A ripple of unease traveled down my spine. Later, as I sorted bills at the table, I replayed the scene in my mind. Evan's sudden urgency, his insistence on control, and now my neighbor watching me too closely. I gathered the envelopes into a neat pile and set them beneath the small camera's lens. My hands moved with quiet precision, as though arranging pieces on a board I hadn't chosen to play. When dusk fell, I locked the doors, checked the safe beneath my bed, and lay awake, listening to the silence of the house. Somewhere out there, threads were tightening, not just from Evan, but from those who lingered too long, who listened too closely. I closed my eyes, steadying myself against the weight pressing in from all sides, and braced for whatever would arrive at my door next. The next morning, my phone buzzed before I'd even poured coffee. A message from Evan lit the screen. "You forgot to sign the forms. Don't make me chase you. You're not keeping track of things like you used to." I stared at the words, forgetting I hadn't forgotten I'd chosen not to sign. By noon, another text came. "Mom, you left the porch light on all day. Are you even noticing these things anymore?" He hadn't been by the house. Someone else was watching. My eyes drifted toward the Kerrigan's porch. Later, when I collected the mail, Mrs. Kerrigan ambled over. "Maribel, dear, I heard you've been forgetting little things. It happens at a certain age." Her eyes gleamed with false concern. I forced a smile. "Thank you, but I keep good records." Her grin widened satisfaction, sharp as glass. That evening, I spread Daniel's envelope across my desk. Deeds, trust papers, IDs, everything Evan wanted. My chest tightened at the thought of them in the wrong hands. I called Dr. Whitaker, my physician of 30 years, and scheduled a cognitive exam. Not from doubt strategy. If Evan wanted to question my mind, I'd have proof. The day arrived with drizzle. Dr. Whitaker guided me through questions lists, even a clock drawing. At the end, he gave me a kind smile. "Maribel, your cognition is normal. You're sharp. Stress is the only weight you carry." Relief swelled. I asked for a copy of his report, and he slid it across the desk. That night, I locked the report into a metal box with Daniel's deeds, trust papers, and Evan's texts. Each page was a brick in my defense. But when my phone buzzed again with Evan's name, the calm shattered. His accusations were spreading, and I knew the storm had only begun. 2 days after I locked the safe, an envelope slid under my front door. No stamp, no return address, just my name scrawled in block letters. I bent to pick it up, my pulse quickening as I unfolded the pages inside. At the top was a letterhead, Clearview Neurological Clinic. I had never heard of it. My eyes scanned downward, stopping at the words mild cognitive impairment, consistent with early dementia. My breath caught. Beneath the text was my name, my birth date, and a signature that looked official enough to fool anyone at a glance. My first reaction was disbelief, then a creeping wave of nausea. I hadn't been to any clinic other than Dr. Whitaker's, hadn't agreed to any evaluation beyond the one I scheduled myself. I ran my fingers over the paper, noting the slight smudge of ink where the pen had pressed too hard. Evan's hand was all over this. I called Mara Feld immediately, my voice tight. An envelope was left at my door. It claims to be from a neurological clinic. It says I'm impaired. Her tone sharpened. Read me the name. Clearview Neurological Clinic, I said. There was a pause, the clicking of keys on her end. Maribel, that clinic doesn't exist in the state registry. It's a shell. This is a forged report. My grip on the phone tightened. But it looks real enough to me. And it will look real enough to a court if Evan waves it around, Mara warned. Judges aren't doctors. They see a signature, a letterhead, and they think it's credible. That's why these fabrications are dangerous. I sank into my chair. The forged pages spread across my lap like a weapon pointed at me. So he's not just pushing papers at my kitchen table? He's building a case. Exactly, Mara said. Which is why we need to be proactive. Keep Dr. Whitaker's report close. If this escalates to court, we'll present his evaluation. But be prepared. Evan may try to argue his report is more recent or more specialized. The idea of my own son standing in a courtroom holding up a forged document with my name on it made my chest ache. Daniel had trusted me to hold steady, to protect what he left. But I felt the ground shifting under my feet. Can you prove it's fake? I asked quietly. We can, Mara replied, but it takes time. I'll need to subpoena medical licensing boards confirm the doctor's credentials, or lack of them. In the meantime, keep everything. Do not destroy that envelope. The details, the smudges, the handwriting on the outside, those are evidence too. I placed the counterfeit report carefully into a plastic sleeve, sliding it into the safe beside the others. The click of the lock this time felt heavier, as if I were locking away not just papers, but the weight of Evan's betrayal. That evening, I walked through the house, turning off lights, double-checking locks, each movement deliberate. Evan's lies were no longer whispers or suggestions. They wore white coats, now carried forged signatures, and spoke in the voice of authority. I stood by the window watching the empty street and braced myself. The battle wasn't about truth anymore. It was about which version of reality Evan could make others believe. It was late morning when the knock came brisk and professional, not the hurried pounding of a neighbor or my son. Through the glass pane, I saw a man in a sharp navy suit holding a leather portfolio. He smiled politely when I opened the door. Mrs. Calderon, he asked. I'm Rick Palmer with Horizon Realty. I'm here for the showing. The showing? The word hit me like a slap. I gripped the edge of the door. There must be a mistake. I didn't schedule anything. He consulted the papers in his folder. Your son, Evan, contacted our office. He said you've authorized the sale of this property. I have it listed for today's walkthrough. My throat went dry, but I steadied my voice. Mr. Palmer? You've been misled. This house isn't for sale. He frowned, the first crack in his polished demeanor. I understand this is difficult, but your son assured us he has power of attorney. Does he have your signature on anything? Mine. Any document with a seal? I interrupted my words sharper than I intended. He hesitated. He provided paperwork. I stepped aside and motioned toward the dining room. Then you should see mine. We sat at the table where Daniel and I had hosted so many dinners. I retrieved the metal safe from beneath the bed, unlocked it, and pulled out the stack Mara had prepared. I laid the trust documents in front of him, the notarized pages naming me sole trustee and beneficiary, the Ladybird deed, transferring the lake house, the confirmation of the trust account. These are binding, I said, firmly. Daniel's estate was placed entirely under my care. I never signed over authority to anyone. Evan has no legal right to sell so much as a brick. Rick's eyes scanned the documents, his composure fading with every page. He cleared his throat and leaned back. Mrs. Calderon, I don't know what's happening in your family, but from a professional standpoint, This is troubling. I don't want my agency involved in any dispute. If your son contacts us again, we'll require direct confirmation from you in writing." "Good," I said. My hands shook slightly as I gathered the papers, sliding them back into the safe. Rick rose quickly, his voice lowered. "I'm sorry for the intrusion. Truly. I'll make a note in our records." When he left, I locked the door and stood still in the silence, the house pressing close around me. Evan had gone from whispers to paperwork to outsiders showing up on my porch. Not an hour later, I heard the slam of a car door, then Evan's heavy steps charging up the walk. He didn't knock this time. He stormed in, face flushed with anger. "What did you say to the realtor?" he demanded. I folded my arms. "The truth. That you're not authorized to sell this house." He threw his hands up. "You're being impossible. You're dragging this out when it could be settled quickly. Do you think you can stop me with a few signatures in a drawer?" I met his eyes, refusing to flinch. "They're not just signatures. They're your father's final wishes, and I will honor them." His mouth twisted a cruel half-smile. "You think you're in control. But if you won't sign, the court will. They'll see how forgetful you've become, how confused. They'll give me guardianship, and then all this will be mine to manage." The words sliced through me deeper than any forged document. He wasn't even pretending it was about helping anymore. It was conquest. I forced my voice to stay steady. "We'll see what the court decides. But you will not intimidate me in my own home." For a moment, we stared at each other, the silence between us louder than shouting. Then he spun on his heel, slammed the door behind him, and the walls trembled with the echo. I sank into the chair, my heart hammering my mind, racing toward what Mara had warned me. Guardianship, conservatorship, the stripping away of everything Daniel left in my hands. The trap Evan was setting wasn't just closing in, it was dragging me toward the courtroom. That night, the house settled into the kind of silence that amplifies every creak and hum. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint buzz of cicadas outside. Then I heard it, Evan's voice low but sharp, drifting from the living room. He must have thought I was asleep. I slid out of bed bare feet, careful against the wooden floorboards, and picked up my phone. The camera I'd installed in the study had a microphone too. I opened the app-tapped record and crouched near the stairwell, where his words carried just enough to be clear. "Mrs. Kerr, I told you once the house is sold, you'll get your share," Evan hissed into the phone. "Yes, a full 5%. Just keep pressing her. Make her believe she's slipping. The judge won't question it if the neighbor backs me up." I clutched the banister, my stomach twisting. So it wasn't just rumor he was promising her money, using her to corrode my credibility. Evan paced as he spoke. "The realtor's pulling back, but I'll find another. Don't worry. Once this goes through, she'll be out and I'll make sure you're compensated. Just keep talking about her memory." The call ended with a click, and Evan stomped upstairs. I hurried back to my room, heart pounding, and checked the recording. His voice was clear, every word a nail in his scheme. By morning, I had sent the file to Mara. I attached a short note. "Proof he's conspiring with Kerrigan. Using financial incentive. What's our next step?" Her reply came before noon. "This is gold. We'll file discovery motions and have the recording authenticated. If he tries to introduce his forged report, we'll counter with this. Hold steady. We'll need you strong for court." Her words steadied me. Still, when I closed my phone, I felt the house shift in weight, as if even the walls knew we were running out of time. That afternoon, the mail slot clattered. I bent to retrieve the thick envelope stamped with the seal of the county court. My hands shook as I tore it open. Inside was the notice petition for guardianship, hearing scheduled in 10 days. 10 days. 10 days for Evan to drag me into court and paint me as incapable. 10 days for me to prove I was not only competent, but still standing. I spread the documents across the dining room table, every page spelling out his accusations. Memory lapses, inability to manage finances, need for supervision, lies dressed up in official language. I touched Daniel's trust papers, the safe key cool in my palm. I thought of his steady voice. Never sign away what you can defend yourself. His faith in me was stronger than any forged report. That evening, Mara called. "We'll move quickly," she said. "I'll subpoena Kerrigan, and once the court hears that recording, their credibility will crumble. But Evan will fight. Expect him to try new tactics." I sat with the phone pressed to my ear, staring at the locked safe at my feet. He won't stop until he takes everything, I whispered. "Then we won't stop either," Mara replied firmly. When I hung up, the quiet returned heavier than before. I set a pot of tea on the stove, the whistle rising like a warning. Outside, Mrs. Kerrigan's porch light flickered on a reminder of the eyes and whispers waiting just across the street. I poured a cup, hands steady, despite the tremor inside me, and set the court notice atop Daniel's letter. 10 days. That was all the time I had to hold on to my name, my home, and the legacy he entrusted to me. And as I stared at the papers, I knew the battle had already begun. The court notice lay on my dining room table like a threat I couldn't fold away. Every time I passed, the embossed seal caught the light, reminding me of the fight looming just days ahead. That night, I barely slept, and when dawn broke gray over the street, I pulled Daniel's envelope from the safe again. Among the deeds and trust papers was the one I hadn't dared touch since the funeral, the Ladybird deed to the property on Lake Michigan. The lake house. His secret. Our secret. The paper trembled in my hands, Daniel's handwriting scrawled in the margin. "For Maribel, hold this quietly." I remembered the way he had sealed the envelope, how his eyes had searched mine when he handed me the safe's key before the illness grew worse. "If Evan ever turns," he'd whispered once, "you'll need a place that's only yours." By mid-morning, I was on the road. The highway unfurled like a ribbon through miles of bare trees, their branches etched against the winter sky. My heart thudded with each passing mile marker, half afraid Evan's car might appear in the rearview mirror. The lake air hit me before I saw the water, sharp metallic, with a chill that bit straight to the bone. The house stood back from the road, 2 stories of weathered cedar with a porch that faced the gray expanse of Lake Michigan. It looked deserted, yet solid, as though it had been waiting. My hand shook when I slid the key into the lock. The door creaked open, and the smell of cedar and dust enveloped me. Furniture was covered with sheets, a faint layer of dust on every surface. But there, on the mantel above the cold fireplace, sat a small wooden box with my name carved faintly on the lid. I crossed the room and opened it. Inside lay a folded note in Daniel's familiar hand. "Maribel, if you are here, then Evan has become his worst self. This house is your refuge. Change the locks. Put everything in your name. Do not feel guilty. My trust was always in you. You are stronger than you think. Love, D." I pressed the paper to my chest, tears blurring the words. Daniel had known. He had seen the hardness growing in our son, the hunger for control that illness had prevented him from confronting. And he had prepared this place not just as a safety net, but as a reminder that I was not powerless. The next hours passed in a haze of practical tasks. I called a locksmith from the nearest town. By afternoon, new locks gleamed on every door. At the utility office, I signed my name on fresh contracts, water, electricity, internet, all set in my name alone. I moved deliberately, signing each form with steady strokes, as though reclaiming pieces of my independence. When I returned, the sun had dipped low, turning the lake into a field of molten steel. I stood at the kitchen window, staring out at the horizon. For the first time in weeks, I felt air fill my lungs without catching. The house was quiet, but not in the suffocating way of home. Here, the silence held possibility. And yet, guilt crept in, curling around the edges of my relief. I was keeping this from Evan, even from Valeria, though her innocence was the only thing that softened the jaggedness of my days. Daniel had left me this place in secret, a gift meant to protect, but secrecy had a weight of its own. I ran my hand along the kitchen counter, the faint grooves of old cutting marks beneath my fingertips. I could almost see Daniel here, unpacking groceries, smiling, as he planned another quiet weekend retreat. He had imagined us escaping here together, safe from the chaos of the world. Now it was only me holding his foresight, like a weapon I wasn't sure I had the right to use. Night fell quickly, the lake's waves lapping against the shore. I lit a lamp and sat with Daniel's note on the table, reading it again and again, until the words etched themselves into me. You are stronger than you think. I locked every door, drew the curtains, and tucked the deed and note into the safe I had brought from home. This house was mine now, as much as the first one. But unlike that house shadowed by Evan's schemes, this one felt alive with Daniel's voice urging me not to surrender. As I lay in the unfamiliar bed, the sound of the lake steady beyond the walls, I couldn't escape the question echoing through me. If I retreated here, was I abandoning the fight, or was I gathering my strength for the battle ahead? The clock ticked in the darkness each second, dragging me closer to the hearing that would decide everything. The following morning, I drove back from the lake house, with Daniel's note tucked securely in my purse, its words pulsing like a heartbeat I couldn't ignore. When I pulled into the driveway, a familiar sedan was already parked at the curb. Raymond, my late husband's younger brother, leaned against the hood with his arms folded. He looked older than the last time I had seen him, lines heavier around his eyes. His posture stooped, but when he lifted his gaze, there was no hesitation. "We need to talk," he said. Inside, over 2 steaming mugs of coffee, he laid it bare. Evan's in trouble. Deep trouble. He borrowed heavily for some business schemes, restaurants and import venture, all of it reckless. The loans weren't from banks, Maribel, private lenders, men who don't wait politely for payments. The words struck me like cold water. And now they're circling. He owes more than he can repay. Selling this house, getting control over the trust, that's his way out. He isn't just greedy. He's desperate. I stared at my brother-in-law, my pulse quickening. So he's not only risking me, he's dragging Daniel's name through this mess. Raymond lowered his gaze. I should have stepped in sooner, but Evan kept me away. I want you to know I'll testify if it comes to that. Evan's creditors have already asked questions about you. They think if he controls your estate, they'll get their money back. A chill ran through me, heavier than the lake winds. Evan wasn't acting alone anymore. Invisible hands were pushing from behind him, tightening the noose. Later that day, I walked to Gloria Madson's cottage 3 blocks away. Gloria had been my friend for decades, a retired nurse with sharp eyes and a memory as precise as her handwriting. She opened the door before I even knocked, as though she'd been expecting me. "I've heard the rumors," she said gently, ushering me inside. "That you're slipping. I don't believe a word of it. I've seen you balancing your checkbook, keeping your schedule, remembering details better than most people half our age." My throat tightened. "Evan has a forged medical report. He's going to use it in court." Gloria's eyes flashed with indignation. "Then I'll stand up there and tell them myself. 35 years in nursing counts for something. I know what dementia looks like, Maribel, and you don't have it. I'll testify." Relief washed over me so suddenly I had to grip the arm of her chair. For the first time in weeks, I felt the ground steady beneath me. When I returned home, I placed Daniel's note beside the court summons, Raymond's warnings echoing in my ears. Evan wasn't just my son anymore. He was a man cornered by creditors who saw me as a payday. And now, with Gloria's steady voice and Raymond's reluctant truth, I knew I had allies. Quiet ones perhaps, but strong enough to steady me for what was coming. The house seemed almost too still as I locked the safe again, but instead of dread, I felt resolve stiffen my spine. The battle wasn't just about documents or rumors anymore. It was about whether Daniel's legacy could withstand the storm Evan had brought to our door. I folded Gloria's handwritten promise to testify into the safe next to Daniel's note and braced myself for the 9 days that remained before the hearing. The knock came in the middle of the afternoon, sharp and heavy, rattling the doorframe. When I opened it, Evan stood there, his expression tight with determination. Behind him were 3 strangers, 2 men in dark jackets and a woman carrying a leather case stamped with the notary's seal. Mom Evans said briskly, "This will only take a few minutes. We're finalizing paperwork." I stepped back, forcing a smile. Paperwork. He ushered them in without waiting for permission. The 2 men flanked the doorway to the kitchen while the notary set her case on the table and began arranging pens and forms. Evan spread a stack of documents across the wood grain, sliding one toward me. "It's time to make things official. Power of attorney authorization to sell the property and transfer of trust accounts. Just signatures. Simple." My pulse hammered in my throat, but I sat down calmly. "So many pages," I murmured, drawing them toward me. "Why don't you read them aloud?" "My eyes are tired these days." Evan hesitated, then smirked. "Fine, if that helps you." He began with a practiced tone, reciting the first paragraphs about authorizing him to act in all financial matters. His voice droned confident, but as he moved further down, his rhythm shifted. "And upon the closing of the property sale, all proceeds shall be directed to the managing party, Evan Calderon." I raised my hand lightly. "Read that part again, dear." "I want to hear it clearly." He repeated the line slower this time, his voice filling the kitchen. The notary's pen scratched notes. One of the men shifted uncomfortably against the wall. "Closing of the property sale," I asked sweetly. "That's interesting, because you've been telling everyone this is about protecting me." Evan's jaw tightened. "Mom, don't twist my words. This is about securing your future. You don't need the stress of managing these things." I leaned back in my chair, my face serene, though my heart thundered. "And yet you're already talking about closing sales before I've agreed to anything." His voice snapped like a whip. "Because it's inevitable. Once the sale closes, all of this will be easier. You won't have to lift a finger." The kitchen seemed to still around us. His own words hung in the air like smoke. I didn't need to say another thing. He had already revealed the truth. That was when the door burst open again. Gloria, breathless, phone in hand, rushed inside. "Maribel," she cried. "The police are on their way." The 2 men shifted, glancing at each other. One muttered, "We didn't sign up for this," and backed toward the door. The notary looked pale quickly, gathering her pens and stamping pad. Within minutes, the flashing lights of a cruiser lit up the driveway. 2 officers entered, hands resting on their belts, eyes sweeping the room. "Ma'am," one said, gently addressing me. "We got a call about a possible coercion attempt." I gestured toward the table. "My son brought strangers into my home with documents I never requested. He tried to force me to sign them." The officer turned to Evan. "Sir, is that true?" Evan's face was crimson, his voice tight. "She's confused. I'm just trying to help her handle her affairs. This was all voluntary." The notary stepped forward, her hands trembling. He did instruct me that the documents were urgent, but the language he read aloud about closing the sale didn't sound like guardianship. It sounded like liquidation. The officers exchanged a look. One bent over the table, snapping photos of the paperwork with his body cam. The other asked me quietly, "Do you want these people removed from your home?" "Yes," I said firmly. The officers guided Evan and the notary out while the 2 hired men had already slipped away. Evan resisted, sputtering about legal rights and family duty, but the officer stood firm. His voice faded down the walkway until the door closed and silence fell. Gloria squeezed my hand. "You were brilliant," she whispered. "You made him expose himself." I sank into the chair, exhaustion washing over me in waves. The forms still lay on the table, Evan's pen marks scattered like footprints of his ambition. I gathered them carefully, slid them into a folder, and locked them away in the safe with the others. Outside, the patrol car idled a moment longer, its lights flickering through the curtains before pulling away. The kitchen smelled faintly of ink and sweat, the aftermath of a battle fought not with fists, but with words. And as the house returned to quiet, I knew the next confrontation would not happen in my kitchen. It would happen in the courtroom. 3 mornings after the kitchen ambush, I sat beside Mara in the courthouse conference room. The air smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant, and the hum of voices from other cases bled through the thin walls. Mara's briefcase sat open before her, a fortress of documents labeled with colored tabs. She leaned close. "Today isn't the full hearing. It's discovery. We're putting everything on record before trial." Her voice was calm, clipped, the kind of confidence that made me breathe easier. The judge entered with little ceremony robes swaying as he settled behind the bench. His gaze swept the room sharp and tired all at once. Evan sat at the opposite table, shoulders squared, but eyes restless. I saw him clench and unclench his fists as Mara rose to speak. "Your Honor, we move to strike the so-called neurological report submitted by Mr. Calderon." She began lifting the forged document with 2 fingers as though it might burn her. "Our evidence shows Clearview Neurological Clinic does not exist. The supposed physician is not licensed. Attached are verification letters from the state board and affidavits from medical associations confirming the forgery." The judge's brow furrowed. He tapped his gavel lightly. "Submit the exhibits." Mara passed them forward with steady hands. Then she pulled out another folder. "Additionally, we request that audio recordings be admitted into discovery. The recordings capture Mr. Calderon promising financial compensation to a neighbor in exchange for false testimony about my client's mental state. These recordings are authentic, time-stamped, and will be accompanied by certification from a forensic analyst." A murmur rippled through the small audience. Evan shifted in his chair, face tightening. He whispered something to his attorney, who looked none too pleased. The judge held up a hand. "If substantiated, this constitutes attempted fraud and elder abuse. I will expedite authentication and review." His voice carried a weight that settled into my chest like a stone, but for the first time it was a stone that steadied rather than crushed. Mara wasn't finished. She drew out a stack of printed emails. "Lastly, we subpoena communications between Horizon Realty and Mr. Calderon. These emails confirm that he claimed authority he did not possess, attempting to arrange a property sale without my client's knowledge or consent. We ask the court to compel production of all related correspondence." The judge studied her, then glanced at Evan. "Do you contest?" Evan's jaw worked furiously, but his attorney spoke first. "Your Honor, we will review and respond. However, we assert these matters stem from a son's good faith attempt to manage his mother's welfare." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Good faith rarely involves falsified reports or undisclosed financial promises." Motion granted. Discovery will proceed on an expedited schedule. Hearing remains in 7 days. Mr. Calderon, you are reminded that elder exploitation carries both civil and criminal penalties. Evan muttered under his breath, a hiss I barely caught. "This isn't over." The judge shot him a warning glance. "Speak up, sir, or hold your tongue." For the rest of the session, Evan's foot tapped furiously beneath the table. his polished facade, cracked eyes, darting hands, twitching sweat gathering along his hairline? When the judge adjourned, Mara gathered our files with precision, slipping them into her briefcase. She leaned closer to me as we stood. We've cornered him. But cornered men are dangerous. Stay alert, Maribel. He knows he's losing. I nodded, the weight of her warning pressing deeper than the gavel's echo. As we stepped out into the corridor, Evan's glare followed me sharp and cold, and I felt the battle lines hardening for what was to come. The courthouse smelled faintly of old varnish and dust when I entered for the hearing. My knees trembled, though I forced them to carry me steadily down the aisle to the petitioner's table, where Mara waited a quiet wall of resolve beside me. Across the room, Evan sat stiffly, jaw clenched, his tie slightly askew. He didn't look at me. The judge called the session to order, and Mara rose first. Your Honor, we call as our witness Dr. Thomas Keating, listed as director of the so-called Clearview Neurological Clinic. A tall man in a gray suit stepped forward, his shoulders tight. He was sworn in and sat down, avoiding my eyes. Mara's voice was even but cutting. Dr. Keating, did you ever examine my client, Mrs. Calderon? He cleared his throat. No. Mara leaned in. Did any licensed physician at your clinic examine her? No. His voice grew quieter. The clinic is not operational. It's a name on paper. And who provided you with the personal details of my client? Her age, address, supposed symptoms? The pause was long, painful. Her son. A ripple of whispers spread across the courtroom. Evan's shoulders hunched, his eyes fixed on the table. The judge's expression darkened. Let the record show the neurological report was fraudulent, no examination was performed. Mara nodded and moved to her next point. We now call Mr. Rick Palmer, realtor with Horizon Realty. Rick walked briskly to the stand, his demeanor brisk, but his face drawn with unease. Under oath, he recounted the day he arrived at my home. Did Mrs. Calderon ever request your services to sell her property? Mara asked. No. She was surprised by my arrival. And who told you she had authorized the sale? Her son, Evan. He insisted he had power of attorney. When I asked for confirmation, he pressed me to proceed without it. The judge scribbled notes, lips pursed. Noted, he said gravely. Then came the moment Mara had prepared me for. She produced the small digital recorder and pressed play. Evan's voice filled the courtroom, clear and undeniable. Mrs. Kerr, I told you once the house is sold, you'll get your share. Yes, a full 5%. Just keep pressing her. Make her believe she's slipping. The judge won't question it if the neighbor backs me up. Gasps broke from the benches. Even the court clerk froze mid-note. Evan's attorney tried to object, but the judge raised a hand. Overruled. The recording is admitted. I sat rigid, my hands gripping each other so tightly, my knuckles whitened. I could barely bring myself to look at Evan, though I felt the heat of his shame radiating across the room. The judge's gavel struck once. This testimony, combined with prior evidence, demonstrates a deliberate attempt to defraud and manipulate. We will recess for 20 minutes before final arguments. The courtroom stirred into motion. Papers rustled, whispers swelled. I turned my head slightly, just in time, to see Evan push back from the table so abruptly his chair clattered to the floor. His face was pale, his lips pressed into a trembling line. Without a word, he strode toward the doors and disappeared into the hallway. Gasps followed him, then silence. I remained seated, the stillness pressing on my chest like a weight. Part of me longed to follow him, to reach for the boy I once held in my arms. But another part, the part Daniel had trusted, knew the distance was necessary. When the recess bell chimed and the judge's clerk called us back to order, Evan's seat remained empty. His attorney shuffled nervously, whispering into a phone, but the doors stayed closed. I folded Daniel's note inside my purse, grounding myself with its steady words. You are stronger than you think. The strength was needed now more than ever, for shame had driven my son from the room, and the silence he left behind was louder than any argument he could have made. The judge raised his gavel once more, preparing to speak, and I braced myself for the verdict that would define everything. When the judge returned from recess, the courtroom hushed. Evan's chair was still empty, his attorney looking as though he wished he could vanish into it. The judge's voice cut through the silence, measured and final. This court finds no grounds for conservatorship. The petition is dismissed with prejudice. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Mara squeezed my hand under the table, her grip firm, grounding. The judge continued, his gaze sweeping over the documents piled high before him. Furthermore, the submission of a fraudulent medical report coupled with recorded evidence of attempted witness tampering cannot be ignored. This matter will be referred to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. A murmur rippled through the gallery. I caught a glimpse of Mrs. Kerr seated in the back, her face drained of color, her eyes darting toward the exit. The gavel struck once. Additionally, the court orders that Mr. Evan Calderon is to have no direct contact with his mother, Mrs. Maribel Calderon, until further notice. All communication, if necessary, will be conducted through legal counsel. The sound of the gavel reverberated through me like the last note of a long, dissonant song. It was over, or at least this part was. I gathered my papers, hands steady for the first time in weeks, and walked out of the courtroom with Mara at my side. In the hallway, reporters' voices clamored for details, but I kept my head high and moved past them. My eyes caught the shadow of Evan at the far end of the corridor, his back against the wall, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He didn't look at me. For a fleeting moment, I almost wished he would, but he turned away, vanishing down a side stairwell before I could say a word. That evening, when I stepped back onto my porch, the neighborhood felt altered. Curtains twitched as I passed. Whispers followed in the air. Mrs. Kerr's blinds stayed firmly shut, her yard empty of the usual chatter. Word had already traveled. She had been caught in Evan's scheme, and the very people she used to gossip with now crossed the street to avoid her. The quiet around me was different now. Not threatening, not suspicious. It was the silence of distance, of people retreating from scandal. My house felt less like a target and more like a fortress. But the ache inside me lingered. Evan had wanted power, and instead he had torn a hole through his own reputation. I closed the door, leaned against it, and listened to the stillness. Daniel's note locked away in the safe seemed to echo in my mind. You are stronger than you think. Strength had carried me through the courtroom, through Evan's schemes, through Kerrigan's betrayal. But strength didn't mend the fracture between mother and son. That break lay deeper than any judge's gavel could reach. As the night drew in, I set a cup of tea on the table, knowing tomorrow would not bring restoration, only the long weight of consequences beginning to unfold. 2 days after the hearing, I sat in Mara's office. The blinds tilted against the pale afternoon light. The papers from court had been settled. My name secured against guardianship, but there was still one folder Mara hadn't opened until now. She slid it across the desk, her eyes steady on mine. There's something in Daniel's trust you need to see, she said. I traced my fingers over the folder's edge before pulling it open. The pages smelled faintly of ink and dust. Mara pointed to a section highlighted in yellow. This clause was sealed to take effect only if Evan attempted to interfere with your estate. Given what's happened, it activates automatically. I leaned closer, the words swimming until I forced them into focus. The trust designated a separate account, sizable and carefully structured. Its beneficiaries, Evan's children. The funds were locked untouchable until they reached adulthood, managed by an independent trustee with no ties to the family. I let out a slow breath. So Daniel thought of them too. Mara nodded. He wanted to make sure the children would have stability regardless of their father's actions. Evan can't touch it. Not now. Not ever. I pressed my hand to my mouth. Emotions rising in a tide I hadn't expected. Relief, yes. Daniel's foresight had shielded what innocence remained. But sorrow, too, because this protection was a sentence against Evan's greed, a recognition of the darkness Daniel must have feared long before I admitted it. Mara's voice softened. Daniel trusted you to carry this knowledge, but he also trusted the future of his grandchildren to be separate from Evan's reach. It was his way of preserving something pure. I closed my eyes and pictured their faces bright, eager, still unmarked by the stains of money and control. I thought of how they had hugged me at Daniel's funeral. Their small arms clinging with warmth, Evan had already begun to cool. They didn't deserve to inherit his hunger. They deserved a chance at clean soil, untainted roots. Will they know? I asked quietly. Not until they're older. The trustee will oversee it. But you can rest, knowing their future is safe. I folded the papers back into the folder, my fingers trembling with both gratitude and grief. Daniel had loved us all, even Evan, but he had also seen clearly what I could not, that love alone cannot cure ambition. Gone rotten. When I returned home, the house seemed quieter, but lighter too. I carried the folder into the study and placed it inside the safe, alongside Daniel's note, the deeds, the recordings, all the pieces of the battle we had fought. Yet this folder felt different. It wasn't evidence of a fight. It was proof of Daniel's faith in tomorrow. That evening, I brewed a pot of tea and sat at the kitchen table where Evan once stood, pressing papers toward me with fury in his eyes. The same table now held Daniel's final safeguard. My heart ached with the contradiction of it all, how a father's hand could both punish and protect in one gesture. I thought of Evan, somewhere nursing his shame, his creditors closing in. Perhaps he would curse Daniel for this claw's rage that he was cut out. Perhaps he would never see that it wasn't about punishing him, but about saving what came after him. I whispered into the quiet, as though Daniel might still hear me. You did what I couldn't. You drew the line. The tea cooled beside me untouched, but I didn't mind. My chest eased for the first time in weeks, the tightness loosening into something bittersweet. Daniel had seen the poison, and he had built a wall high enough to keep it from spilling onto the children. When I rose at last, I turned off the lights and stood by the window. The street was still Mrs. Kerr's blinds drawn tight, the neighborhood shrouded in a wary hush. But inside my home, the air felt cleaner. The fight was not over, but the future, at least for the children, was no longer Evan's to claim. And that knowledge steadied me for what remained ahead. The week after Mara revealed Daniel's final clause, I packed my car with boxes of clothes, framed photographs, and the safe that had guarded my life these last months. The house in town felt too heavy with whispers, and with Evan's shadow. It was time to move into the place Daniel had left me in secret, the lake house that now stood waiting like an open hand. When I arrived, the air off Lake Michigan was sharp and alive, curling around me, as if to remind me I was still here, still standing. I carried the boxes inside, one by one, arranging them slowly, breathing in the cedar scent that filled the walls. With every item, I set down a teacup, a quilt, Daniel's worn flannel. I felt the burden of the old house lift. In the garage, I found a set of Daniel's tools neatly arranged along the pegboard. It seemed right to leave my own mark here, something to claim the house not just as refuge, but as home. From a block of driftwood I'd collected years ago, I carved a plaque. Careful strokes spelling the words that had carried me through the storm. Kept in trust, love, and good sense. I mounted it above the fireplace, the letters catching the morning light. Daniel's spirit seemed to nod in approval, the room settling around me like it had been waiting for those words all along. Life grew quieter, but not smaller. I set up a small desk by the window overlooking the water, and from there began work that felt both healing and necessary. With part of the trust Daniel left, I created scholarships in his name awards for young people studying nursing and engineering, the fields that had shaped both of our lives. Each application I read reminded me of the possibilities Daniel had believed in young minds, reaching striving, still uncorrupted by greed. Writing the letters of award gave me a joy I hadn't expected, as though I were handing Daniel's legacy directly into the hands of the future. Evenings became gentler. I would sit on the porch with a cup of tea, listening to the waves fold and break against the shore. The sun sank low, staining the sky in colors Daniel would have paused to admire his arm around my shoulder. I spoke to him sometimes quietly, not asking for answers, but thanking him for the foresight that had saved me when love alone might not have been enough. The neighborhood back in town carried on without me. I no longer saw Mrs. Kerr's stiff profile or the way neighbors turned away from scandal. That world had receded like a tide, leaving me here on firmer ground. And though the silence of Evan's absence ached at times, it no longer crushed me. I had not won him back, and perhaps never would. But I had survived his schemes, and I had protected what Daniel entrusted. In the end, survival itself felt like victory. Yet as I looked at the plaque above my hearth, I knew survival was only part of it. Dignity hard-won defended, kept intact despite betrayal. That was the truest inheritance Daniel and I had ever built. I poured another cup of tea, the waves murmuring their steady song beyond the windows, and prepared myself to write the next letter, the next scholarship, the next quiet chapter of a life reclaimed. Months passed before Evan reached out again. The message came through Mara, short and hesitant. He wanted to meet to speak face to face. I agreed, but on my terms. Neutral ground, a small cafe by the lake, not my home. The day was clear, the water glittering through the cafe windows. I arrived first, choosing a table tucked in the corner. My hands curled around the warm mug of coffee when Evan walked in. He looked thinner, his posture bent by the weight of debts and shame. The fire in his eyes had dimmed, replaced with something I hadn't seen in years, uncertainty. He sat down across from me, silence stretching until he finally spoke. "Mom, I'm sorry." His voice cracked, and he cleared his throat. "I thought I was protecting you, but really, I was trying to protect myself. I let desperation make me cruel." I studied his face, the boy I once knew, flickering through the man he had become. My heart ached, but I kept my voice steady. "Your words matter, Evan, but they don't erase what you did." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I know. I don't expect forgiveness overnight. I don't want to lose you completely." I set my mug down and folded my hands. "I'm willing to have you in my life, but there will be boundaries. Quarterly calls, not constant demands. We can share a meal sometimes, but no money, no control, no interference with what your father left. Do you understand?" His eyes shone with unshed tears. "I understand." For the first time, he didn't argue. He simply sat there, shoulders sagging, as though my words had built a fence he couldn't cross, and maybe, finally, he accepted. That was how it had to be. We parted with a brief, tentative hug, the kind that held both history and caution. As he walked away, I felt neither triumph nor bitterness, only a strange calm, like the lake when the wind finally stills. That evening, I returned to the lake house. The air was warm, the porch bathed in gold. Inside, I set the table for two. My granddaughter was visiting, her laughter already echoing through the hallway as she unpacked her school bag. I stirred a pot of soup, the scent of herbs filling the kitchen. She bounded in, hair tangled from the wind, and hugged me around the waist. "Grandma, is dinner ready almost?" I said, smiling as I kissed the top of her head. As I ladled soup into bowls, I felt lighter than I had in months. The fight was behind me, the boundaries drawn, the future steadier. I had not surrendered dignity for reconciliation. I had chosen dignity first, and reconciliation, if it grew, would have to live within those lines. The waves lapped softly outside as we sat down together, and I bowed my head for a quiet moment of thanks before lifting my spoon.